Lawyers who work in many different areas deal with people who have been through really the worst that human beings can do to each other. The area I work in that I'm most familiar with is the area of murder cases, particularly cases where the state is seeking the death penalty. Well, the trauma of the murder itself is tremendous for the, the victims of the crime, but also everybody who gets involved in it. And lawyers who defend these cases are exposed to some really horrible things. And there is really a phenomenon called vicarious traumatization that happens to folks. If you're not familiar with it, it can sneak up on you. But when you're involved in working in these kinds of cases and you get exposed to the kinds of awful events that have happened and the horrible things people have done to other people, it can really affect people who work on the cases and who deal with the people who've survived such things. Understanding more about it is really the first step to knowing how to deal with it. And so just recognizing the possibilities. But it's also true that if you're going to represent somebody in a capital case, you're also going to have to deal with trauma in your client's life. In all the capital cases I've been involved with, and really everyone I know about, the defendant himself has been through tremendous trauma in his life. I'm not saying that as a way of excusing or justifying what a defendant has done. I'm just saying it is a fact. And what defense lawyers do in capital cases is, if they're doing their job right, they do a thorough investigation of the defendant's whole life. A large part of their job in these cases is to convince the jury, the sentencer, that this is a human being who has done a horrible thing, a human being who probably deserves to be punished severely, but nonetheless a human being. And if defense teams can convince juries of that, the jury is much more likely to sentence the defendant to something less than death, to a life sentence as opposed to a death sentence. But if you're going to really learn who the defendant is, as a defense lawyer or somebody working on the defense team, you're going to encounter usually some really horrible things in the defendant's life and background. Most people who've committed these kinds of crimes were the subject of abuse, really horrible situations in their own lives growing up. You meet family members who maybe still are in very dysfunctional kinds of relationships. And the more you dig into that kind of family background, the more you get to know your client on a personal level, which you do when you represent someone in one of these cases. The more a lot of those really awful traumatic situations become a part of your life. And you really have to learn how to deal with it. And you have to, at a minimum, be honest about it and self-aware enough to realize that all of these traumatic events that you're helping your client with, that you're investigating, are going to have an effect on your own life. And if you don't have some way of acknowledging it and dealing with it, and sometimes even getting professional help for it, it can take its toll on you in a hurry. I've had to deal with that, as anyone does. What I've just been talking about in terms of the really traumatic events of the case itself and all the surrounding events and all of your client's life. For speaking personally, I've learned really through experience over the years that, at least for me, digging more deeply into my client's life and my client's situation, and at the same time looking deeply within myself, is really necessary in order to deal with it. That's not what I understood early on, because that seems kind of counterintuitive. I think our initial reaction is, I just won't think about that, or I will put that aside, or I will force myself just not even to think about what my client did, what my client himself has been through, or how that's affecting me. But denying it, ignoring it, covering it up, doesn't make it go away. And so I think just acknowledging it makes a world of difference. For me, actually having a personal relationship with my client has been helpful. I represented one man who committed a particularly brutal crime. He was executed for that crime a few years ago. I was present for his execution, and that was a traumatic event for me to watch this person that I'd come to know over many years, that I had really developed a close relationship with, to watch his life be taken. And people have told me, oh, you never should have let yourself get so close to him. You know, you're asking for trouble. But I've had time to reflect on it, and I really am convinced that actually having a close relationship with him was better for him and for me than if I had tried to be cold and distant and professional and act like there was no human or emotional aspect to it. I was actually enriched by my relationship with this man. As ironic as that seems, a man who, there's no dispute, committed a really brutal crime, and it's a crime for which he was deeply remorseful. It's a crime that still haunts me to this day when I think about the horrible thing he did. But the real paradox, the mystery at the heart of it is, I also came to really came to like, and in a lot of ways admire, this man who had done it. He, as Sister Helen Prejean often reminds us, all of us are more than the worst thing we've done, and thank God for that. This man committed one of the worst crimes you'd ever want to see, but there was more to him than that, and by really getting to know him well over a period of time, I was able to see not just the horrible crime he did, but also all the really good that was in him. And when his life was taken, it was a sad and frustrating time for me. But I was also able to reflect on the close relationship we developed over the years, and I think that really helped sustain me through it. As a lawyer, I failed in my representation of this man. That is, I lost the case. He was executed because I was not successful in my work for him as a lawyer. And we in the law tend to think of our work in terms of wins and losses. And the way you're successful as a lawyer is you win more than you lose. What that case forced me to reflect on is that, you know, we're not called to win all of our cases. The way I view my calling, if I'm representing somebody, is to be faithful, to do the best I can for my client. And on reflection, I think I did the best job I could along the way. I wasn't perfect, but although I was not successful and my client was executed, and I don't feel like I personally was a failure. I feel like our system fails. I feel like, seeing the death penalty actually carried out on someone that I had actually grown quite close to just convinced me more than I ever had been before that this machinery of death, as Justice Blackmun called it, is deeply flawed. It's an evil thing, and it renewed my commitment to fight against it. But if you, as a lawyer, define your own worth solely in terms of whether you win or lose, you're in deep trouble. And we all have that tendency, but we really have to recognize that the outcome is not the true measure. It's the work you do and the relationships you establish that really give value to your work.